Okie dokie. So today we're going to get into completing Chapter 7 from our Study of Language text. And we're going to be working on not only the different parts of speech from Chapter 7, but we're also going to be discussing phrasal verbs, what they are, how to identify them, and some tips on teaching them. To prepare for this, make sure that you've read through Chapter 7. We will not be addressing the forms of the structural analysis of sentences and breaking them down by using brackets and such, but we will be addressing other forms of grammar. So grammar is also known as Yoda's worst enemy, and many of you know it's because of our subject-verb order agreement. Yoda tends to flip-flop these, whereas per prescriptive grammar rules, we make sure that we always have our subject followed by the verb. So here's a short word from our teacher. So according to Yoda, we need to make sure that we address what we understand with grammar, and we have to unlearn what we've learned. I think the hardest part, and I've said this before, is going to be seeing a word for its function within a sentence. So what is it being used as? Is it being used as a verb here, or a noun, or adverb, or adjective? And that can be confusing at times. We have to make sure we know what exactly the different parts of speech are and how they function in our language. So per your textbook, our text starts with a letter, and it reads, "Dear Ann Saunders, my husband recently ran for public office. He went to the local radio station to record an ad to be read on air. The copy was written by someone at the station. One of the sentences was, 'Me and my family will be moving to this town.' When I heard it on the air, I was shocked. My husband said, 'That's the way they wrote it.' It didn't sound right to me either. I immediately went to the station and challenged them. They said, 'You are wrong.' We then telephoned a graduate at Northwestern University who was an English major. He said it could be either I or me." So here we have to kind of pay attention to our prescriptive and descriptive grammar rules. According to prescriptive grammar rules, usually we would have an I here in this place. But more recently, we've kind of agreed that using me in that place is fine as well. So in the past, we've studied phonology and morphology. And we know that phonology is what we do when we break down the different sounds within words. So we've learned voice or voiceless, fricative, and stops having to do with the manner and place of a sound, diphthong referring to two vowel sounds occurring one after the other. We discussed more recently morphology, so exactly what the breakdown is using morphemes of a phrase or word, taking the word lucky and separating it into the different parts of different morphemes. So we have functional, we learn lexical, derivational, and inflectional. And what's important is that, so I can take a word, break it down in terms of pronunciation or form in terms of morphemes, but grammar teaches us that sometimes there's just certain forms that we create with our words that just don't make sense. So the words themselves on an individual level, they have meaning. But when I take the term boys lucky or lucky boys the, we know that these are not grammatically correct. So this is why we study the parts of speech, and these parts of speech give us our grammar, our English grammar. It's what differs our English grammar or our language from other languages. Here we can see that the sentences are broken down by their part of speech. So we have the lucky boys found a backpack in the park and they opened it carefully. Being able to identify what each word is within the sentence is our goal by the end of class. So we use these terms to label each of our words. We use articles, adjectives, verbs, etc. And this comes from our understanding of traditional grammar. And our language originates from many Germanic languages, which originate from Latin and Greek. So basically, we're using these rules from these other languages to help develop our own. So here we begin our breakdown of the different parts of speech. Our first one is the most common one, the one that we're probably the most familiar with, nouns. And nouns are words used to refer to people, objects, creatures, places, qualities, phenomena, and abstract ideas. You might notice that I took this directly from your text. Everything that we can see, that we believe exists, we can assume can be named as such, and thus it is a noun. We break down the types of nouns that we can have between sometimes count and non-count, or they're called mass nouns. More commonly, though, you will hear it be called a non-count noun, and basically something that you can't count. So we have nouns we can count, like 4 books, continents, a few dishes, dozen buildings. Those I can count. Other nouns, such as water, air, energy, blood, I can't count that, right? I can't take it on an individual, like drops of water, I could count drops maybe, but actual water on its own, I can't. So that's a non-count noun. Here are some more examples. He got into trouble. We don't know how much trouble. There's no way of counting that. It's a non-count noun. He had many troubles. He can probably count exactly how many. Experience is the best teacher. That is a non-count noun. And we had many exciting experiences in college. It is countable, right? So it can take on more than one function here, or more than one form, either count or non-count. Our articles are pretty straightforward and simple, a, and the. They're used with nouns to form noun phrases in order to classify these things, these nouns. You can have a banana or an apple. I'll take the, basically it. Adjectives are words used typically with nouns, and they give us more information about whatever noun we're describing. So, for example, the people are happy. People is being described as happy. The objects are being described as large. The experience, which is a noun, is being described as strange. So you always have to know where that noun is. If you found that it's sometimes difficult to distinguish between adjectives and adverbs, then this website I found gave a lot of information that was very helpful in making a difference or understanding the difference between the two. Verbs are used to refer to various kinds of actions. Oftentimes it can be in the infinitive form or a conjugated form. To go, to talk, to be, to have, those are our infinitive forms of these verbs. Adverbs add to the verbs. They are typically used with verbs. They give us a little bit more information about the verb, how the action was done, right? Because the verb is the action, how it was done, I'm adding to it. So terms like slowly or yesterday, telling you how or when it happened, really or very. Many, but not all adverbs will end with an ly. So when in doubt, usually those terms will end with an ly. Usually those are the adverbs. So just make sure that you're able to find the verb in the phrase that you think it's modifying. Some frequency adverbs such as always, often, sometimes, seldom, and never do not follow this rule. Of course, because they don't end with ly, right? Always, often, sometimes, seldom, and never. There's a list of 100 adverbs here, which is a great resource for you to look over as well so that you become familiar with the different types of adverbs. Prepositions are words used with nouns and phrases providing information about time, place, and other connections involving actions and things. There are about 150 prepositions in English. So again, I'm providing you with a link with these prepositions. Here are some examples: at, in, on, near, with, or without. And of course, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. Sometimes some terms will fall under multiple categories, which I'll show you guys later on. Pronouns are words we use in place of noun phrases. So usually when we say she, he, and this pronoun chart is pretty awesome. Note that the red chart is possessive adjectives, okay, so be careful with that. That's another type of adjective. It's not just always a describing word like colors, you know, we have my, your, etc. I'm saying it's my, whatever the object would be. That is an adjective describing that noun. These pronouns, though, are different. I, me, mine, myself, and so on. So we have our normal subject pronouns, which we should all be familiar with, object pronouns, and then possessive and reflexive. Conjunctions are words used to make connections and indicate relationship between events. So sometimes a conjunction can come even after a comma when we complete or when we bring together two independent clauses. Words like and, but, because, and when are examples of conjunctions. And another link for you with more conjunctions. So these links are for you to click on. I do want you to open them and write down a couple more, some that you find to be the most common that you'll come across as we continue working through grammar in the next few weeks. So understanding the different parts of speech is very important. As I said before, sometimes it can change a little bit. A noun can be defined as a form that comes after an article and can take inflections for possessive and plural. So this is another definition of what a noun is, aside from what we've already discussed. But not all nouns are like this. So we just have to make sure that we understand how a word is being used in context. Okay. So there are, of course, things that take place in our language, in other languages, and then things that just only take place in our own. And that's what we're going to get into for the rest of the lecture. We discussed agreement in class earlier, and we talked about how we have to agree with number and gender. And there are a couple of others. We've brushed on tense, so verb tense. Person is important. Who is the speaker? First, second, or third person. And voice. Is it an active voice or passive voice? So is it the family loves Kathy versus Kathy is loved by her family? Number is determining whether or not we're talking about something singular or plural, and gender is the natural or grammatical gender, which we will address further on. In class, we've discussed gender. We actually said that gender was, with our first example about calling Mary, saying Mary is a nice girl, and we said he instead of she. That's an issue with gender here, with natural gender. Grammatical gender, you may have heard of before, and it's usually in Romance languages. In French and Spanish, for example, all objects, all nouns that you can see, anything out there has a gender, all nouns do. It doesn't mean that that object is masculine or feminine, it just carries that in the language when it's being identified. As I said before, that natural gender, Kathy is our noun, right? And her is our pronoun. We know that those go together. She and her, we're him and his. So this is a natural combination of gender. This is natural because it's based on our biology. But grammatical is based on the type of noun that you're describing. It's not tied to the sex. So for example, anything that you can look at right now around you, your computer, your mouse, pictures, books, television, anything like that, they all have genders in other languages. Typically, articles and adjectives have different forms to agree with the grammatical gender of a noun. So for example, the way I say a book, the letter A in another language might have a masculine form and a feminine form. If you've studied Spanish before, you know that oftentimes nouns, endings might change to an O for masculine and A or A for feminine. In French, we indicate that with the article, un, un, or une, une. If you have any others, I would love for you to bring them up in class when we meet again. Now we're getting back into a little bit of our prescriptive grammar rules that we've discussed before. You do want to be familiar with a couple of them, so I picked out the most common ones that we use in our language today. So our first one, don't end a sentence with a preposition. That one we discussed already. Don't split infinitives, and that's splitting the to go, to talk, to play, and we'll discuss that later on as well. Don't use double negatives. The subject of a sentence must agree with the verb. We practice that in class. So if I'm saying I am eating, right, I will use am after I. You am eating, we know is grammatically incorrect. It should be you are. Use much for count nouns and use many for non-count nouns. We don't have much coffee, and we don't have many cups of coffee. Capitalize the first letter of a sentence. That one's pretty straightforward. Use subject pronouns after the verb be. It was I who called you. We won't say it was me. We would say it was I. Use the definite article the before names of rivers and geographical areas, but not before the names of lakes or continents. I don't think you knew that one. If you do, that's pretty surprising. So we say the Nile, the Middle East, and then we say Lake Tahoe or Asia. So prescriptive rules are not natural. This isn't something that we just learn automatically. Those are descriptive rules because that's through socialization and interaction. Prescriptive rules are taught in school. Now, the prescriptive approach is not always appropriate. So I probably won't use it when I'm gossiping with friends or hanging out outside or, at a bonfire or something like that at the beach. I might use more descriptive grammar rules. But prescriptive grammar approaches are appropriate in the classroom and other academic areas. So earlier I mentioned not splitting infinitives, and at the beginning of our lecture we discussed a little bit of Star Wars, so now we're getting into a little bit of Star Trek, and Captain Kirk is always using this. This is a descriptive grammar approach, and he's actually splitting infinitives. So the infinitive in English has the form to plus the base of the verb, as in to go, to be, to talk. And it can be used with an adverb, such as boldly. At the beginning of each episode in Star Trek, Captain Kirk would use the expression to boldly go. This is a split infinitive. He put in that adverb boldly in the middle of this infinitive. And normally we cannot do this. So the correct forms would be to go boldly or boldly to go, not splitting it. This is, again, an example of a descriptive grammar rule. Now, for other language speakers in mostly Latin-based languages, such as, again, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, the word to go, okay, is one word. In Latin, it's ire, right? In French, it's aller, A-L-L-E-R. And so splitting, the actual physical splitting of an infinitive cannot take place. It just doesn't happen. So this is where I would normally in class have you practice a little bit of what we learned so far. In your text at the end of chapter 7, I do want you to address and try to work on numbers 1, 2, and 3 so that we can discuss those in class when we meet again after spring break. Number 1 is identify all the parts of speech used in the sentence. Number 2 is what is the difference between grammatical gender and natural gender? And number 3 is what prescriptive rules for the proper use of English are not obeyed in the following sentences, and how would they be corrected? We're going to end our lecture today with a discussion on phrasal verbs. So one of our first phrasal verbs, what's up, right? This phrasal verb, and usually all phrasal verbs are made up of a verb followed by a particle, and it's usually one of our prepositions. Excuse me. We separate these into different categories. We have what we call separable phrasal verbs, inseparable, transitive, and intransitive. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of each of them. I think sometimes it's difficult for us to really identify some of these, so I am going to include some websites for you at the end of this PowerPoint to check out some more examples. Some of them are pretty straightforward for us because we can see how they might indicate other meaning, but some of them are a little bit more difficult. So here we have examples of separable or inseparable phrasal verbs. Our first three are separable. What this means is that I can take my verb and preposition or any other particle that I'm adding there, and I can interject something in the middle. So in the words ask out, that phrasal verb ask out, it can be to ask someone to go out. So I put in someone to go in the middle there. That means it's separable. I can separate those two words. Bring about or bring on, to make something happen, right? Bring up can be separated. An example of inseparable would be drop by. So the definition or meaning is to visit unexpectedly. So if I tell someone I'm going to drop by, I wouldn't interject anything else in the middle of those two words. Some of our phrasal verbs actually can be separable or inseparable depending on their definition. So get back from, as an inseparable would be to return from somewhere. I just got back from China. A separable would be, when I'm saying getting back from, that means I'm receiving something that I lent to them. I just got my charger from Jessica, for example. I separated that phrasal verb. And here are some more examples. Take after is inseparable, take off separable, etc., etc. Here's a link with a bunch of phrasal verbs to look over. Then we have transitive and intransitive phrasal verbs. The only thing you need to know is that basically one has a direct object and one doesn't. So a transitive phrasal verb has a direct object. If I give something up, I stop something, stop doing it. He says he gave up smoking. The direct object is to smoking here. Put off, to postpone something. We've put off the meeting. That's the direct object. The action to put off is being done to the meeting. To set up, which is to organize something. I've set up a filter. The action of setting something up is being done to the filter. This is when you do need to understand what a direct or indirect object are. Direct object means your action is being done to it. So let's say I have a ball and I'm going to throw the ball to you. What is receiving the action? The ball is. I throw the ball to you. What do I throw? The ball. The action to throw is being done to the ball. So that is the direct object. The indirect object is you. I throw the ball to whom? To you. So you're receiving it. You're indirect. So again, smoking here, the meeting, and a filter, those are our direct objects. Intransitive do not have a direct object. So to back down from something, to back out, back up, fly over, go ahead, get along, get by, get away, get around. And there are many, many more that are intransitive, where they're not followed or they do not have a direct object. And of course, some phrasal verbs can be both. It's not so important that you know off the top of your head exactly which one's which. The most important thing here is to basically just start practicing with getting used to recognizing phrasal verbs. So here in our first example, when I say look up, as in to get better and improve on something, it's an intransitive verb. Sorry, phrasal verb. After a horrible year last year, things are starting to look up. There's no direct object. The verb look up is intransitive. It cannot have an object. Here, when I look up a word in the dictionary, though, it is transitive. I always look up words. The action to look up is being done to the words. They're being looked up. So again, you have to have a subject, the verb, and then that verb is doing an action to a direct object. Then that's transitive. So just a few teaching do's and don'ts. Never just do the typical exercise you find in a textbook. Don't just, oh, these are 4 phrasal verbs. Let me tell them to see if they can find them somewhere in their text. As we saw before, many times one phrasal verb can have multiple meanings. And so it's better to be very specific in exactly which ones you're having them look over. We should always approach the phrasal verbs systematically, helping students understand the logic behind the preposition, following examples, and pointing out different collocations and different forms of its